Coravanta coverage of big news about Blake Lively. Good afternoon, everybody. Happy Friday to you on this February 7th, 2026. I've got all your news for you here on Coravanta. We've got Olympic updates, we've got more on the Justin Baldoni versus Blake Lively saga, and yes, Hillary Clinton is trending on Twitter today because she's calling out representatives. Let's do this. Turn the cameras on. Let's do it live. She is not backing down from the fight over the Epstein files, and frankly, the optics are wild. On top of that, we've got a pastor, yes, a reverend, getting ready to call out Donald Trump directly in the middle of a prayer. And then there's the developing story of ICE and the detention centers, warehouses being purchased across the country to house detainees. A full-on humanitarian crisis, and I'm here to cover it all. This and more starts right now on Coravanta. Before we dive into Blake Lively, let's start with something lighter. Well, lighter if you ignore the fact that it's basically human endurance on ice. Lindsey Vonn, 41 years old, and let me tell you, as someone who's a few months shy of 41 myself, I know what it feels like to hurt your back sneezing the wrong way. She tore her ACL in a crash just last week. And yet, she's still training for the Olympics. If this doesn't make you want to grab a ski and root for her, I don't know what will. Gold medal push is still on. The injury? Barely a speed bump. She's back in beast mode like nothing happened. Meanwhile, the Olympics have technically already begun with qualifying events, including new extreme challenges like mountaineering, yes, running uphill with your skis strapped on before you ski down. Somehow, the world thought this was a reasonable idea, and while the Olympics are supposed to be a distraction from the dumpster fire happening in our country, ICE insists on escorting Olympic athletes into Milan. The Milan mayor says, "No thanks," and ICE responds, "We insist." Honestly, when has our government ever taken no for an answer? It's going to be wild, and I'll be here to cover the drama, on the slopes and off now, onto the Hollywood side of things, where true crime meets Tinseltown, Blake Lively versus Justin Baldoni. Quick recap: legal drama, allegations of harassment, and a courtroom where nuances matter more than sound bites. Our friend, Not Actually Golden, an attorney with serious harassment law cred, gave a fascinating take on why Blake might be losing on one of her claims. Remember, she has to prove harassment. But it's complicated. There's this story floating around that Baldoni allegedly called Jenny Slate sexy and said Blake Lively looked beautiful, but in context, it was about the movie visuals, costumes, characters. Not them as people. Not Actually Golden points out that during oral arguments, the judge started asking questions about what counts as harassment in this context. Since Baldoni was directing, he wasn't just some random crew member, he was guiding performances. If a director says a costume or scene looks sexy, does that cross the harassment line? The judge seems to say, probably not. Here's where it gets tricky. There was a scene where Baldoni was directing young Blake Lively. Her character, Isabel Ferrer, played a younger version of Lily in a romantic moment. Blake's argument, the director's comments about the scene being hot were inappropriate, potentially sexualized. But, in context, this was about guiding a pivotal acting moment, not personal attention. Again, nuance is everything here. These aren't two people working in the fragrance section at Sears, they're crafting a film. The judge got Blake's legal rep to admit that directorial guidance about a character or costume does not equal sexual harassment. Not Actually Golden, who's been in harassment law for years, has pointed out that what's fascinating isn't just the case itself, it's the psychology. Which side are you on? Think of the Depp versus Heard scenario. Online, people pick sides like it's war, not justice. Here, the same thing is happening. KTNKC, for instance, shifted from being pro-Baldoni to a more neutral stance based on new evidence. What evidence? Unclear. But the takeaway, people use anything to justify their angle. That's why we have juries, to assess the facts beyond the noise and the online smear campaigns. Oh, the smear campaigns. Not Actually Golden went from 0 followers to 22,000 almost overnight. Why? Because she provides nuanced, thoughtful analysis. Unlike a lot of the clickbait, she breaks down context, law, and psychology, and people notice. Meanwhile, channels like mine get accused of bias because we monetize coverage, but let's be real, if making content pays the bills, people will always try to undermine credibility. Here's the real point: we live in a world where picking a side is inevitable. If the jury sides with Baldoni, some will still call you a supporter of the wrong side simply for agreeing with the verdict. If they don't, the same thing. Either way, public perception often ignores evidence. I suspect the jury will side with Baldoni, but nothing is guaranteed. The law isn't about public approval, it's about thresholds of proof. And the claims? Career-altering if true, but after looking closely, they may not meet that bar. Could Baldoni have directed better? Absolutely. Did he commit harassment? That's harder to prove than a viral tweet suggests. Meanwhile, my personal philosophy: I'm a fence-sitter when needed. I wait for evidence before deciding. Even if the internet screams pick a side now, I give myself space to process. And that's fine. Waiting doesn't mean neutrality, it means reason. It's why meaningful conversations with people you disagree with are still possible, even in the age of screaming headlines. Switching gears slightly, but staying in public spectacle territory, AEW Dynamite in Las Vegas took a weird turn. During a wrestling match, the crowd started cheering F-Ice, a moment of protest that broke the fourth wall. Wrestlers realized they were part of something bigger, something historical, even if scripted. The face-off? Two wrestlers staring at each other, deciding whether to keep the narrative or acknowledge the crowd's chant. Could they have walked out together, taking the fight to the streets instead of the ring? Maybe. Wrestling as political theater. Welcome to 2026. Back to politics. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent got grilled over taxpayer money and billion-dollar lawsuits, essentially caught gaslighting the public about government funds. Inflation, grocery prices, and claims about Trump's great economy all collided in a tense exchange. 21.5% cumulative inflation? Check. Claims groceries dropped under Trump? Debunked with the Bureau of Labor Statistics numbers. Accountability is messy, especially when billionaires and public officials are involved. Meanwhile, Hillary Clinton is calling for transparency around the Epstein files, going viral, cameras on. Let's stop the games. Let's do it live. She's demanding oversight and accountability, and yes, some unlikely allies, even former controversial Republicans, are siding with her. It's an odd alliance, but it underscores the chaos and unpredictability of the current political landscape. At the National Prayer Breakfast, Thomas Massie stood up as one of the few Republicans sticking to principles, while Trump attacked him publicly. The contrast between rhetoric and policy is stark. Prayer, politics, and media spectacle collide, leaving the public to parse who's sincere, who's performative, and what it means for everyday Americans. And as for detention centers, ICE has begun purchasing mega warehouses across the U.S., intending to house thousands. Contracts ballooning from $10 billion to $55 billion, earth-filled defensive barriers, 8-foot Conex box walls, medical waste protocols, the works. Communities near schools and neighborhoods are bracing, and public scrutiny is intensifying. Questions about ethics, legality, and human rights abound. This isn't theoretical, it's unfolding now, funded by taxpayer dollars, and Coravanta will continue to report. So far, in just the first half of today's Coravanta update, we've covered Olympic perseverance, Hollywood legal battles, wrestling protest culture, Treasury accountability, Hillary's transparency push, partisan spectacle at the National Prayer Breakfast, and massive ICE detention expansion. And we're just getting started, where we continue Blake Lively coverage, follow-ups on ICE developments, and break down the political theater that has the country glued to its screens. I'm Lars Harry, and this is Coravanta. Alright, welcome back to Coravanta. If you just joined, we're covering everything from Olympic heroes pushing through injuries, to the legal chess match of Blake Lively versus Justin Baldoni, to the political circus that is the National Prayer Breakfast, and the ICE detention centers creeping into American neighborhoods. Buckle up, because part 2 gets even wilder. Let's return to Blake Lively versus Justin Baldoni. As we discussed, Blake's harassment claims are under extreme scrutiny. Not actually Golden, our harassment law expert, pointed out that the judge is drawing lines around directorial context. If Baldoni calls someone sexy or hot about their character, costume, or scene, not the person, that's legally not harassment. It's the kind of nuance the internet loves to ignore because nuance doesn't go viral. Remember the scene with young Isabel Ferrer? The one with that love-making scene, yeah, the horizontal mambo, as some might call it. Blake's team tried to argue that Baldoni's comments were sexualized, inappropriate, potentially career-ending. But the judge asked her to clarify, is he directing a scene or targeting a person? She admitted it was directing a scene. Boom. That's huge. Context matters, and suddenly the narrative of harassment isn't as airtight as headlines claimed. Now, psychologically, this case is fascinating. People online immediately pick sides like it's a battlefield. KTNKC, for example, shifted from a pro-Baldoni stance to neutral after reviewing new evidence. What's that evidence? We don't know yet, but it highlights how perception and bias shape public debate. People will latch onto anything to validate their stance, regardless of whether the legal threshold is actually met. And this is why juries exist, to weigh evidence over theatrics. Here's the kicker, both sides are hyper-focused on evidence, and minor details get amplified. You'll see social media smear campaigns, targeted attacks, and people obsessing over the messenger more than the message. Not Actually Golden went from 0 to 22,000 followers overnight because her analysis is nuanced. She breaks down why things matter in law, context, and human behavior, something the cancel first, read later crowd often misses. Meanwhile, mainstream commentary keeps reducing complex legal discussions to punchy headlines. Shifting gears, AEW wrestling in Las Vegas became a protest theater. During a Dynamite match, the crowd started cheering Beth Ice, breaking the fourth wall. Wrestlers realized they were in the middle of a historic moment, scripted entertainment intersecting with social activism. In one fleeting 20-second moment, the scripted fight paused, eyes met, and it became symbolic. Could this have sparked a real-world collaboration to protest ICE policies? Maybe. Could it have sold more tickets? Probably not. But the optics, iconic. Now let's talk politics again. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent got grilled over taxpayer money, billion-dollar lawsuits, and economic claims. Inflation is 21.5% cumulative. Grocery prices? Up, contrary to previous claims. And the secretary tried to dance around the numbers. Accountability is messy when billionaires, elected officials, and narrative control collide. Coravanta's here to cut through the gaslighting and show what's actually happening. Hillary Clinton went viral today, calling for public oversight on the Epstein files, cameras on. Let's stop the games. Let's do it live. Her demand for transparency resonates even with some unlikely allies. Former controversial Republicans, figures like Matt Gaetz, are reportedly siding with her. Odd alliances form when the stakes are high and public scrutiny is intense. It's a reminder that political alignment is sometimes fluid, situational, and, honestly, chaotic. The National Prayer Breakfast. Absolute theater. Thomas Massie stood out as one of the few Republicans sticking to principle, while Trump publicly attacked him. The contrast between rhetoric and policy could not be starker. Prayer, political maneuvering, media spectacle, it all merges into one messy tableau. Meanwhile, everyday Americans are left parsing who's genuine, who's performative, and what these debates mean for their lives, and of course, the ICE detention centers. Contracts for mega warehouses ballooned from $10 billion to $55 billion. Earth-filled defensive barriers, 8-foot Conex box walls, weather-resistant guard stations, these aren't your average detention facilities. Communities near schools are bracing for the first wave. Medical waste protocols, biohazard incinerators, and planning for mass detainee health care, it's chilling. Questions arise about ethics, legality, and humanity. Are these facilities intended for deportation or something far darker? Coravanta isn't speculating, we're asking the tough questions that need answers before it's too late. Meanwhile, the optics are political gold for some. Trump's rhetoric clashes with the reality of ICE's expansion. Public outcry grows, social media amplifies whistleblowers, and suddenly, accountability isn't optional, it's demanded. Citizens are realizing that with the right evidence, activism, and exposure, the machinery of power can be challenged. So, where does that leave us? Blake Lively's case is a microcosm of the broader culture, perception versus reality, social media narrative wars, and the legal threshold for career-ending claims. ICE and political theater remind us that systemic actions, mass detention, billion-dollar contracts, opaque governance, have immediate consequences for real people. Wrestling protest moments, viral political statements, and Olympic heroics are threads in the same tapestry, society grappling with truth, influence, and morality in 2026. We're living in an era where nuance is dismissed, spectacle dominates, and the public must navigate carefully. Coravanta will continue to unpack it all, daily, twice a day, and with the context mainstream outlets often ignore. All right, friends, that's your roundup. Blake Lively's legal battle, the nuances of harassment law, Baldoni's courtroom strategy, ICE detention expansion, political theatrics, and viral protest moments, covered. Stay tuned, because tomorrow we'll dig deeper into follow-ups, legal commentary, and more explosive developments that will affect Hollywood, politics, and your communities. I'm Lars Harry, and this has been Coravanta. See you bright and early tomorrow.